So Uncharted has received a rotten rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Not a lot of critics seem to love this movie, but I wanted to go ahead and see what other critics would have to say who gave this a fresh rating. I want to take a deep dive into this film and see if there's something missing that the majority of people aren't necessarily looking at. So instead of reading all of the negative reviews in this one, we're going to be looking at all of the positive reviews for this film. So far, it's at a 51% and there are 37 reviews on the tomato meter. The audience score isn't there yet, but we do have the critics' consensus so far. Promisingly cast but misleadingly titled, Uncharted mines its best-selling source material to produce a disappointing echo of superior adventure films. So far, I haven't seen the movie yet. It hasn't been released in theaters, but I want to go ahead and get a quick start in looking at some of the positive reviews that have already been out from critics who have gotten an early screening to this movie. So let's go ahead and see what some of the critics had to say so far, at least for the ones who had a positive rating for this film. In the tradition of Raiders, The Mummy, National Treasure, and Jumanji, Uncharted taps into a familiar tradition of globe-trotting, roguish adventure and disguises the influence of those earlier films better than you might expect. Once Uncharted settles into its treasure-seeking groove, the movie finds its footing, leading to a thrilling third act and the promise of a new successful franchise for Holland and Wahlberg. Holland's physicality, chemistry with Wahlberg, and some inventive action scenes make this adventure more fun than it is on paper. Fans of the video game might be bitterly disappointed, but everyone else will find this pleasant escape at the multiplex. Uncharted is far from the worst movie you will see this year. However, it is another video game adaptation that fails to adapt the interactive medium to an inactive medium without losing some of the magic that made the source material so good. Okay, so far I have a couple things to say about this. One, it looks like that this movie is aimed for people who haven't necessarily played the video game and are only wanting to see just a nice action flick that has adventure and goes on discoveries and likes to find other things, and if you like that type of stuff, then you'll find this movie to be somewhat fun. But if you are a fan of the Uncharted games, then you're not necessarily going to be that pleased with it. And I don't know if that would consider itself to be a good thing, because this movie is made for Uncharted fans. If you are going to adapt a video game series into a live-action film and you're not necessarily being that honorable to the video game, then what's the point of you creating the film from the beginning if you're not going to try that much? The other thing is that it seems like it was leading on towards the fact that this movie is probably going to try and do more Uncharted movies in the near future. And that would depend on whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, because if this movie is just like mediocre or it's not that great, then what's the point of having another one being created? But again, that would probably depend on me on whether or not I really enjoyed the first movie or not. So that right there actually depends. Uncharted is an entertaining action adventure thanks to the chemistry of its cast and what it offers to audiences. Okay, that seems easy enough. Like, Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg, they're easy to like whenever they're on screen. A lot of people seem to like their presence, so if they do actually enjoy seeing these actors in another movie, especially in an action-adventure film, then that would make sense on why people would actually find this movie to be thoroughly enjoyable. Uncharted is a big, warm-hearted derivative dose of high-adventure nonsense, and it almost defies its audience not to enjoy it despite its shortcomings, which in the end only the most mean-minded are likely to really give too much of a damn about. Its pacey Fleischer makes good use of Holland's Spider-Man training, but Holland is no Harrison Ford. A growing number of young people have never seen an Indiana Jones film. Many of them will like what they find here. The Uncharted games remain in a league of their own, but this movie captures their essence and delivers a rip-roaring, swashbuckling adventure with heaps of unexpected twists, full-throttle action, and another standout performance from Tom Holland. One of the best video games of all time makes for a rather ordinary movie. Okay, so far with what I'm seeing right now in terms of these positive reviews, they're kind of going in a pattern where they're saying it's good fun and it's not perfect. And it tries to do references towards older movies that were fun for them back in the past, and because some of that style of fun is in here, people will thoroughly enjoy it because of that. They're making references to like The Mummy, National Treasure, and a lot of times Indiana Jones. And because the actors on screen are very recognizable and you can like them because of their presence, then you'll find this movie to be just entertaining enough because of that. I don't know if that qualifies for a good movie, but that does qualify for entertainment enough. And if that is the target of what this movie is going for, rather than trying to do anything spectacular, then I think this movie has done its job. Now, that's probably why I'm not going to go ahead and look at every single positive review that's on this website, mostly because they're saying the exact same thing over and over again. But I am understanding what these people are talking about when they're saying that this is actually a positive film rather than a negative one. Uncharted is at least spiritually faithful to the games and makes for a decent bit of matinee fun in the vein of National Treasure or 1999's The Mummy. But without the controller in your hand, it lacks the magic ingredient that makes it so special. I don't know why that's actually like a fresh rating, because it looks like that it's going like negative, sort of. And that actually makes it for an interesting thing to talk about, because the difference between games and film mediums, there's definitely a big shift between them. Now, video game adaptations are odd for me, because if you're doing a video game adaptation and you're taking away some of the charm that makes the video game very likable, then there's no real point in seeing a movie. But the way that you experience a video game is different compared to how you're experiencing a movie. So in order to get a positive rating on how you're supposed to get a video game adaptation in a film structure, it's very difficult to pull off, and I think it only works if you do a video game that doesn't necessarily have a storyline. And I think the reason why an adaptation such as, like, say, The Last of Us would probably not work in terms of, like, a film structure or even, like, in a television show structure, it's because you already have a story that's already perfect. And if you decided to adapt that again, why should you go ahead and adapt that already if you're going to go ahead and make changes that were already perfect? Sure, it's a video game, and there's probably other things that you can add in, but if you add in those things, it feels like that you almost take away some of the likability that's already within the game, or you don't get the exact same experience that you really liked from the video game towards the adaptation in a television structure. I'm not sure why that review was there to begin with, since it looked like that was being a lot more negative than it was positive. The Uncharted movie may differ from assorted better films, but it's a victimless crime. When it embraces the potential to be silly and spectacular, it's an absolute delight. With plenty of action-adventure moments and a great chemistry between Holland and Wahlberg, but also clunky world building and dodgy VFX, there's just enough for fans of the games to enjoy. Okay, I haven't seen that. I've gotten a lot more reviews on the site saying that people who are fans of the games are not necessarily going to be that excited to see the film, but this is the first time I actually seen the opposite a little bit. Uncharted is a solid foundation for a new adventure franchise that has all the elements we look for in the genre, and that has 2 stars that may not be Nate and Sully we had in our heads, but they could get there with time. That's a really positive way of looking at it. Maybe you're not used to the characters with how they are on the first going experience, but if they are willing to continue on with this franchise and you're seeing them in other sequels to come, you could probably get used to them and you start to enjoy what these characters have brought on the big screen and like them for who they are. That's kind of how I felt when I saw Zendaya as MJ in the Spider-Man movies. I know that's kind of ironic since that's like another Tom Holland movie, but I want to say, like, I wasn't impressed with Zendaya's performance at the very first Spider-Man film. But once I saw Spider-Man Far From Home and No Way Home, I actually tend to like her a lot more often. And honestly, I'm glad that she didn't get replaced with anybody else. Okay, so that's all of the positive reviews that are on the website right now. Here's what's gonna happen. I'm gonna go ahead and skip over towards day 2 where I'll read more positive reviews that are on the website, and then I'll skip over towards the next day where it's actually released in theaters, give you guys my thoughts, and see if I agree with the positive reviews or more so of the negative ones. This was a little bit interesting. I've seen a little bit of negative reviews that shouldn't be on the fresh side, but I think it's like the rating system that's going on with Rotten Tomatoes where they're kind of confusing one another, or they're saying like, okay, maybe this one is a little more fresh than it is negative, or this one's a little more negative than it is fresh. But either way, let's go ahead and skip over towards day 2. Okay, it's day 2, and I'm using a new camera. That's why the way the footage looks into this day compared to yesterday. But anyway, it's day 2. We're going to go ahead and look into some more positive reviews, and apparently the score went down even lower. It went from a 50 or 51% to a 40%. There's at least 88 reviews now, and a lot of them seem to be more on the rotten side. Instead of 12 fresh reviews, there's now 35 fresh, which means there still are some people who have a more positive edge towards it. So let's go ahead and see more on what it is that people are talking about that makes them like this film. The movie's moderate pleasures won't invite fervent rewatches or convert those unfamiliar with the source material, unless they're rampant Holland or Wahlberg fans, but it keeps the viewer rapt in the unfolding plot. Do not miss the opening scene, especially if you risked your life during a global pandemic to see this movie on the biggest screen possible. Even a bland imitation can be a good enough time. What can you get out of Uncharted will likely depend on your standard of a good enough time, but you can't fault it for skimming on scale. It does just enough to be worth your time, but I doubt it will stick in your memory too long afterward. I had some fun with it. It lacks the style needed to make it stand from a crowded genre, but there are some fun action scenes to make for a solid experience. So again, just like the reviews that I saw from yesterday, it's pretty much saying the exact same thing, that people like the film for its action. It's not necessarily bad, it isn't anything terrible, it's just a fun time that you'll be able to have in the movie theater because it has decent action. It got Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg, and they're usually cool whenever they're in particular movies that are actually decent. The more fervent fans may never see their favorite characters translated as well as they like, but will almost certainly be getting more movies after this one. So it's best to look at Uncharted the same way it views itself, not too seriously. Far-fetched, yes. Inconceivable, eye-rolling, absurd too. It also feels a bit unreasonable to expect anything more or less from Uncharted. Again, why is this one on the fresh side? It seems like that it's kinda bugging the film down. Uncharted is a rip-roaring modern treasure hunt that plays by video game rules and has a blast doing so. It's the kind of movie you'd want out of the Uncharted world, and it is fun to see Tom Holland shine doing fun stunts and bringing an iconic character like Nathan Drake to life. While Uncharted did not fully enter the stratosphere of greatness, the film allows cinephiles to escape and travel into the world of Nathan Drake and its beautiful locales. So these reviews actually give it a little more positive on the far end, except for the one that said that the movie was pretty much absurd and far-fetched. It seems like the movie is going towards the length of what some people have experienced from the video game in terms of the lore, the adventure, in terms of mystery, or some of the personality that does come from Nathan Drake since he is such a popular character within the video game realm. And if you do see the likability that comes from these characters, and if you enjoy that kind of shtick, then that's what makes the film really exciting to watch. Now again, I don't know if this movie is going to be that entertaining or not, because that actually depends. And it looks like for the most part, a lot of people are saying that it isn't. But we'll just have to wait and see what my opinion is. And again, most of the other reviews are pretty much saying the exact same thing. Again, the references or some of the nostalgia that they used to have when watching like action-adventure films in the past, and Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg's presence on screen are pretty much likable enough. So again, we're just going to go ahead and skip towards the next day, and if more of the positive reviews are going to say the exact same thing, then I'm pretty much not going to read them. I'm just going to go ahead and give you guys what my thoughts are on the movie Uncharted. So with that being said, let's go ahead and skip towards the next day where I just left the theater, and I give you guys my brief thoughts on what do you think of the movie Uncharted. So I just got back from seeing Uncharted in the theaters, and what did I think of it? It was alright. I think I would agree with what some of the positive reviews are saying. This movie did have some fun. I think that some of the actors actually brought in some charm towards the film, even though some of them are very miscasted. In terms of the way they're playing their characters, I think they needed to do a little bit more work with what they're doing here, especially with Mark Wahlberg as Sully. He kind of comes off more as an arrogant jerk. And even though at some moments he is pretty cocky and it is a little bit fun, there is something personal going on in his character arc that does require him to show some amount of grief and torment, but instead he comes off as cocky. But as for like a one-time watch, this movie wasn't anything terrible to experience. It was alright. I think that it's even worth like a matinee price of admission because there are at least a couple of action scenes that were really fun to look at. Now the film as a whole, major problem with the writing, major problems with the characters being one-dimensional and caricatures of other people that we've seen with other action-adventure films. I think another problem here is that this movie doesn't really embrace more of the passion of discovery and wondering. There should be excitement to this, but all that passion to seek something is not there. It's just stale and generic. So yeah, this movie, I do kind of agree with what they're saying, but I also kind of agree with what the negative reviews are saying. This movie is not bad, but again, it could have been better. It could have been a little bit more exciting. But anyways, guys, what did you think of this movie? Do you like the movie or dislike the movie? Put your thoughts down in the comment section below, and let's have a conversation about it. And like this video if you agree with what I say, or dislike this video if you disagree with what I say. I don't mind the dislikes. So that is it I have for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be sure to see you in the next video. video.